Former Paralympian champion Oscar Pistorius is to be freed from jail from parole, or rather to parole, nearly 11 years after murdering his girlfriend Reva Steenkamp. He shot her multiple times through a bathroom door on Valentine's Day in 2013, later claiming he mistook her for an intruder at their Pretoria home. Pistorius, now 37, was sentenced by the South African court in 2016 to serve 13 years and 5 months in prison. The parole board has since set his release for the 5th of January 2024. To give us some analysis on this is legal expert Ulrich Roux. Ulrich, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. Now, considering that this was Pistorius' second parole hearing in under a year, how do you think the legal system has handled the process, especially with the initial collapse of the first parole bid?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Yes, there was certainly some confusion pertaining to Oscar Pistorius' application to be released on parole. Initially, there was a miscalculation pertaining to the period that he had already served, and that was then rectified by the Constitutional Court upon him making an application to the highest court in our country pertaining to the time period that he's already served. Subsequent to the ruling by the Constitutional Court, it has now been determined that he has in fact served half of his period of imprisonment of 15 years. So essentially, he served 7.5 years in custody, and accordingly, he became eligible for parole. He brought his application to be released on parole, and the parole board found that he is a person who is eligible to be released on parole, that he has been rehabilitated during his period of incarceration, and upon his release, he will be able to positively contribute towards society. So, given the initial confusion pertaining to the calculation of time, that can happen. Luckily, the Constitutional Court has rectified it. I think the main reason for that miscalculation was because of the fact that, remember that he was initially sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. That was then taken on appeal by the state. It was then sent back to the High Court, where an 8-year period of imprisonment was imposed. Then another appeal was launched by the state to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and then ultimately the Supreme Court of Appeal handed down the period of imprisonment of 15 years. And that's definitely where the confusion arose pertaining to the time period that he has served. So, that aside, I think that normal process has been followed. He brought a proper application to be released on parole, and the parole board took everything into consideration and accordingly has found that he is someone who can be released on parole. They of course considered the severity of the offence. He was convicted of murder, which is of course a very severe offence. Then the impact that the offence had on society, particularly the deceased person's family. And then thirdly, whether he has been rehabilitated properly whilst serving his period of incarceration, and they found that all of those conditions have been complied with, and accordingly is a person who qualifies to be released on parole.
Let's take the comments of the deceased family here, Reva Steenkamp. The Steenkamp family spokesperson mentions that therapy sessions will be a part of Pistorius' parole conditions. How significant do you believe these sessions are for his rehabilitation, and also the concerns raised by Reva's mother about what she describes as the athlete's huge anger issues?
Yes, so certainly, that's where the notion of restorative justice comes into play. Our criminal justice system is not focused on punishing someone for the rest of their life and condemning them, but rather to rehabilitate them so that they can then later be, after serving a period of imprisonment, be reintegrated into society and positively contribute towards society. And that the fact that he will have to go for therapy sessions, for anger management classes, etc., that goes towards that notion of the fact that if he is a person who is able to be rehabilitated and reintegrated into society, then the necessary measures and steps must be put in place and tools in order for him to positively contribute towards society. And that is why he would have to attend to those classes as a condition of his release on parole. one can only go on the evidence that was led during the trial and in the papers before the Supreme Court of Appeal. And certainly there a case was made out that he did recklessly fire those 4 shots into the door that ultimately killed Reeva Steenkamp. Whether it can be likened to anger management issues, that did not really come out during the trial. But I think as a precaution, the parole board has made it a condition that he needs to attend to these classes so as to ensure that he is equipped with the necessary tools and mechanisms to adequately deal with situations where it could possibly become explosive, where anger management can come into play. I think also what the parole board had in mind when imposing that condition is the fact that, Oscar Pistorius was one of South Africa's most well-known celebrities when this incident occurred and when he was ultimately convicted and sentenced to imprisonment. And no doubt, when he's now reintegrated back into society, he's going to be faced with challenging situations where people possibly recognize him on the streets or in a shopping mall or at a gathering, whatever the case may be. He could face severe ridicule, severe criticism, and he must be equipped to deal with these scenarios adequately so as to avoid a possible infringement of his bail conditions and also possibly, him breaking the law as a result of being provoked and faced with difficult situations. So certainly, that is the reason why the parole board imposed these conditions, to adequately equip him with difficult situations as he is reintegrated into society.
Ulrich, I want us to look at some of those conditions before I let you go. Now, the parole condition states that Pistorius will be monitored until his sentence officially expires. How effective do you think this monitoring will be in really ensuring public safety, considering the concerns expressed by Reeva's mother for the safety of other women who may come into contact with him?
Well, remember that, when a person is released on parole, that doesn't mean that they're free and that they've now served their entire sentence. They still remain under the control of the Department of Correctional Services until that their full sentence is served. So in other words, until the entire period of 15 years imprisonment elapses. So he will be monitored, extensively. He will have a parole officer. He will have to report. He will be subjected to ad hoc visits to his residence. He will not be allowed to consume alcohol. He will not be allowed, to attend to functions where alcohol is served, nightclubs, bars, any of that nature. So I think it is effective, and certainly, the ball is in his court now, and his future is in his hands. If he adheres properly to these conditions and he serves out the remainder of his sentence, then he will be seen to be a person who has served his time and who is now properly reintegrated back into society. Should he infringe upon these conditions, he could very well face a situation where his parole is revoked and then he is incarcerated to serve the remainder of his sentence in prison, which is certainly a situation which he would want to avoid. So I think the conditions will be implemented effectively. Certainly the Department of Correctional Services will be taking it very seriously. And I think that one can expect Oscar Pistorius and his legal representatives to advise him to take it very seriously and to strictly adhere to these conditions until his sentence is served in full. And then he will be seen as a person who has successfully been reintegrated back into society.
Ulrich, thank you very much for your time. That was a deep dive into the complex situation surrounding Oscar Pistorius'